Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As usual, I talk to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by an autism campaigner and a Commonwealth Games Gold Medalist, Thomas Henley. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me here. I'm quite excited to do a little interview, break up the monotony of COVID isolation.
Yeah. Exactly. A lot of the interviews that I've done actually is during the lockdown. It's great to have you here, Tom. So let's start off with you telling us your background, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
So I started off with a sort of like an athletics career. I started off as a Taekwondo fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And over sort of like, I started relatively late on in the sport. It's quite heavy with people who started when they're younger. Mm-hmm. And I gradually got better in the sport, and I started to go to the national championships, and I worked my way up to get medals, and eventually it got to a point where I started winning golds at the nationals.
Mm-hmm.
And I started traveling around all around the country, all around different countries, to be honest, mm-hmm. To do fights. And I think one of the biggest achievements that I got was a gold at the Commonwealth Games in, I think, 2014, mm-hmm. Which is obviously quite crazy thinking back on it. And then after my Taekwondo career sort of fizzled out, I went to uni where I studied biomedical sciences, and it's basically just biology, but it's more focused around humans. Mm-hmm. So it's different aspects of the human body, and I decided to study quite specifically on sort of like neurochemistry, and anything to do with the brain really quite interested me. Mm-hmm. And in my third year, I went to Thailand to study for a year. I sort of backpacked around the country, around Southeast Asia for about 2 months with my friends. And then when I came back, I had sort of like more of a renewed sense of purpose, and sort of I deliberated a lot about who I am and what I want to do. Mm-hmm. And I took on the Manchester Leadership Award. It was basically like a module at uni that sort of delved into global topics and issues, and it really encouraged me to get more into my media work around autism and mental health, which is something that is quite meaningful to me. And I was awarded the Gold Award for going into Taekwondo clubs and teaching kids with mental health difficulties, sort of bring them into the sport and help them get used to the competition environment. And then in my final year, I decided to take on a science communication project, which is basically very broadly pretty much anything that you can do that's science related. And I decided to do a documentary called Asperger's in Society, a 40-minute film, which quite honestly was a very silly idea if you're looking back on it, but right now I think it's got about 5,500 views on YouTube.
Cool.
Just over a month. So it's quite good. And sort of throughout my university time, I developed a YouTube channel called Asperger's Growth, where I talk about my own experiences with autism and mental health, and also the 40 Auti podcast, which is more or less the same thing, but more kind of a relaxed style interview, chat over a coffee kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. You clearly done a lot of things. You've been a gold medalist for the Commonwealth Games, and you said you've also done traveling. But I understand that at the heart of what you do is campaigning about autism and Asperger's syndrome. Now a lot of people who would be watching these videos, they're students. So if you could just give us a snapshot of what actually is autism. I understand this is a spectrum. And at one point of that spectrum is the Asperger's syndrome. So if you could just kind of give us an overview of this condition.
So at its core, it's a neurodevelopmental condition.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's categorized as quite a broad umbrella of things. So you've got things like pervasive developmental disorder, you've got Asperger's, you've got classic autism, you've got Kanner syndrome. There's a lot of different things, but it's all under that umbrella of social difficulty, basically. There's at its core, it's a difficulty, whether it be communication, whether it be picking up on certain social cues. It's generally surrounded by a lot of social isolation, and it's depending on where you fall on the autism spectrum, really depends on the level of functionality that you have. So it used to be that Asperger's was a lone, sort of a lone condition, and people would talk about that as a separate thing. But nowadays it's combined into one. So it's just autism, it's ASD. And I was diagnosed with Asperger's, which I think still stands as a thing on my record. It's not really changed at all. And it comes with a lot of difficulties. I think the main thing is the social difficulties. Now, depending on what gender you are, if you're female, it tends to be a lot harder to recognize. Girls tend to be a lot better at this thing called social mimicry, where they copy people around them, watch TV shows, mimic things, and sort of blend in. Whereas on the guy side of things, it tends to be more that the person is pretty isolated and tends to stay away from groups and tends to do their own thing. And they're all sort of intermingled with different comorbidities, such as OCD and anxiety and a lot of things. And I think also, sort of the sensory difficulties as well. So hypo and hypersensitivity, difficulty with loud environments, difficulty with high, very bright lights. And there's a lot of things that classify autism, which makes it pretty, as you can tell, it makes it pretty hard to sort of summarize.
And I think the best way to describe it is just to say that it's a spectrum. So what you see from one person is different from another person. I think that's the best way. But of course, there's an overarching symptoms, just like what you've mentioned, difficulty concentrating and difficulty with social interaction. But at what age were you diagnosed with autism, and how did that diagnosis come about, and how did you feel at that time?
So I actually tell this story quite a lot. Throughout my sort of early years prior to the age of 10, I did show a lot of typical autistic kind of behaviors, such as stimming, those repetitive self-soothing movements. I used to do that a lot. I used to spin around a lot in a spot, make myself very dizzy. But to be honest, I think for the most of it, I was quite a friendly and bubbly little kid, and I was always quite keen to socialize with other people. I think at one point it became a problem because I started to get start to feel a little bit like an alien, which is quite a common thing for autistic people. You start to feel a little bit like people are progressing faster than you can comprehend, and the social environment becomes very difficult. So I was diagnosed at the age of 10, and I remember it quite vividly as, one of the only times in my life where I, cried tears of joy, because at the time it's very isolating when you don't know you have it. Because you assume that everybody is the same as you, and you assume that everybody's got the same thoughts and the same processing and behaviors. So I think that instance was quite a pivotal point for me.
Mm-hmm.
But as I started to get older, I think with the co-occurring mental health conditions that I had, like my severe depression and anxiety, it made it difficult to understand what autism is. I didn't really have much time to, delve into the intricacies of it, but I decided to do that when I went to university in my second year. And I read up a lot about social behavior, about psychology, about sociology, and I basically built up my social skills and my communication skills and my interpersonal skills up with my own techniques and with my own knowledge and my own progression. And that's one of the key things that people come to my channel for. It's not the typical sort of way of understanding and working with the things that Asperger's presents, and people are drawn to that, I think.
And if you don't mind me asking, Tom, so what's the most common reaction when you get when you tell people that you have a diagnosis? Because you don't really, I suppose this is not really a good thing to say, but you don't really meet the actual stereotype of people with Asperger's or with autism, because at such a young age, you've achieved a lot. You're a Taekwondo gold medalist, and you're a campaigner. You've gone to university. You've done a lot of things at such a young age. So what's the usual reaction that you get?
I think to be honest, if I was to be honest, I mostly get positive reactions to it. It's, I think because I've worked on my social skills so much, and because I am very good in social situations, sort of like group parties or meetings or meeting up with friends and stuff, I often sort of occupy the center point and I interact with a lot of people. So people definitely don't know that I'm autistic, even in areas where there's a lot of, even at work, where people work with autistic people. And so when I tell them that I'm autistic, it's more of a shock, it goes against the sort of myopic stereotypes that surround autism, and because of that, people are very curious. They're very intrigued. They want to hear about it. I guess some of the negative experiences that I've had, they usually come from people who either have no idea what autism is, so they either don't think that it's a thing, and they're just they think that people are different, and yeah, some people are a bit odd, but they haven't got a condition, and so they sort of dismiss it. Whereas other people have their ideas about autism, maybe they work in the fields, and so try to tell me what I should think about autism. So for example, I'm very in tune with what autism means to myself, and I'm quite happy to say that I'm an autistic person. Whereas someone with that training and someone who has an awareness of it may come over and say, you don't have to, you're not autistic, without the autism, it doesn't mean anything. You're a person first and you're autistic second. And it comes from a good place, and it doesn't upset me. It's more of a humorous thing, but they just completely don't get what I'm saying. And sometimes it's very funny, but there's definitely a mixed bag, mostly intrigue, mostly curiosity.
You actually remind me of, you're the second person who has autism that I've spoken to. You remind me of Kelly Granger. The difference between you and Kelly, so for those of you who are watching this, you can actually watch my interview with Kelly Granger. Kelly has been diagnosed with autism when he was already 40 years old, and then he's got 2 children who also has an autism, and he's also very active with autism campaign. And with Kelly, because he's already 40, so during the time when he was born, people were not really aware of autism. So it's really different. Like you were born at a time when people talk more about autism. But what I'd like to talk about is, because you mentioned earlier that you were 10 when you were diagnosed with autism, and then you engaged in behaviors such as stimming. So what led you to do Taekwondo? Is that because you were so active?
I think I've always been interested in sports.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since I was younger, my mum, encouraged me to go to different sports, whether it's tennis or swimming and pretty much anything, any sport. So I already had that background of sport, and I already saw the benefits of it. Mm-hmm. The reason why I went into Taekwondo is it's quite a difficult one, because I was, in my teenage years, I was diagnosed with severe depression and a few dissociative conditions, as well as generalized anxiety disorder. And so it was a very difficult time for me. And I was quite an avid swimmer at the point. I'd gone to competitions and I got medals, and I think I was looking for an outlet, but I didn't know what outlet it was. And I was very drawn to the idea of the hero sort of character, like in stories. And I'd watched a lot of anime, so it was like Dragon Ball Z, and I watched a lot of films about mixed martial arts and boxing. But a lot of the martial arts that I went to, there was a lot of aspects of touching people, which I didn't like. So I found myself gravitating towards Taekwondo, which obviously, you make contact with people with your foot, but you're within quite a bit of a distance from them. So it's more or less a match made in heaven for me. And Taekwondo was extremely important for me because it was an outlet for my mental health. So it's something that this is something that brought me through life, having a very difficult childhood. Every time that I would train or every time that I would compete, I would always put 100% of my energy and effort and determination into it, because it was in sort of a more cognitive sense, me battling my depression and my mental health conditions. So it was very pivotal for my mental health and my confidence, and I've brought that confidence that I got from the sport into the aspects of things that I've done in more recent years.
Mm-hmm. Now, could you tell us more about you winning the gold medal in the Commonwealth Games? I bet your family are very proud of you during that time.
It was a bit of a crazy one, because at the time, I didn't have a lot of confidence. So the thought of going to the Commonwealth Games was enough to, change my life in my sense, in my head. I'd never pictured myself as someone who would be at that level and be able to go and compete at such a reputable sporting competition. And I started off, obviously, having a lot of difficulties, with my anxiety came a lot of panic disorder type things. So, before my matches and stuff, I would quite often have what people would typically describe as an autistic meltdown. And so that made the competition quite difficult. And something else that sort of propped up as I was going through the early stages of the Commonwealth, they'd merged the top category with my category. Mm-hmm. So I was in the category just below the heavyweights, and they'd brought up people from the bottom and lower and higher weights. So I had a massive, gigantic Australian dude to fight in my last match. And if you've ever seen films like Rocky, like anything like that. That fight was like that. It was the closest thing, you know, it, kind of last seconds, last milliseconds kind of fight. And it was going well. I was knocking him over quite a lot, and he was losing points for it. And it came to a point where he had 2 or 3 points ahead of me, and I was sort of chasing him. And the crowd was it was so loud that it felt like I had headphones on and I was listening to a movie where, you know, there a boxing fight or something, and everyone's, you know, cheering and screaming. And I was so tired, and he was so tired, and we were just battling it out at the last fight of the day. And yeah, I beat him very, very thinly beat him. And I went up and I was awarded my medal, and obviously it was surreal. And at the end of the day, everyone was packing up and everyone was getting ready to go. And I was one of the last people to go, and I was sort of hanging around near the door because, you know, people were making announcements, and they were making announcements for the trophies that they're giving out for athletes who had performed particularly well or put on a good show or showed a certain determination and grit. And I was listening out. I was like, wait, just a second. Like, everyone's ready to go. Everyone's tired. I know, but I just want to listen. And they said my name, and I had loads of gear on me, loads of bags and stuff. So I flung the bags onto the floor and I sprinted all across to the podium, and they gave me this trophy, really. Yeah. And for the last match that I had, which was absolutely amazing. And the whole day was very surreal. It was very strange to go home and just be at home with the knowledge that I'd just been there and got that. And it's complete.
Yeah, I could understand, especially that you've also represented Britain, and it's a major competition. Do you still do do you still do Taekwondo until now?
I think once I got to university, I didn't have much support from the university. I applied for scholarships and stuff, but they didn't take me on for some reason. And financially, it was very difficult because I had to get a train to one place, and it took me an hour. Had training for about 2 hours, came back, and it turns out I was getting home at about 11:30 every night. And I did that for about a year during my university. But as I started to progress through uni, the modules started to get harder and the examinations started to get a bit more tough. And I really couldn't keep it up. But I think right about now, I signed up to a boxing gym. So I went to a boxing gym in Moss Side in Manchester. I didn't realise that it was a Moss Side boxing gym, but so I started boxing, and now that I'm back home in my hometown in North Yorkshire, I am boxing at a local club, just keeping my fitness up for, you know, situations where maybe another Taekwondo club pops up out of somewhere and I can train. But it's could be going into boxing, could be staying in Taekwondo. I don't know. But
now, you mentioned that sports-wise, you did not get enough support from the university, but overall, how would you describe your university experience? Did it impact you having an autism? Did it impact your academic performance?
I think, yeah, there is a certain difficulty with exams, because they work on the assumption that you understand what they're asking of you. As you get further into uni, they start to ask more broad and non-specific questions, and I found that extremely hard because it is basically a hit and a miss for me during exams. Some questions I would get what they were trying to say, or I would guess to what they're trying to say and be right. other questions, completely not get the right end of the stick and just do terribly on them. But one thing that did particularly impact my experience was my mental health. And I found the social environment at university quite hard to deal with. I didn't have many friends. I wasn't very social, and my mental health impacted me a lot. It made it so that there's some times during my university life where I just couldn't function to a large degree, and I'd had a lot of intervention and help from the doctors and stuff like that, but it was a very tough 3 years at Manchester. Very tough. Even the year abroad was fairly tough on me, but it's kind of one of those things that you have with having such high rates of mental health symptoms and stuff. It's very hard to deal with.
So what would be your advice for those who have autism, or for those who are struggling with mental health issues, if they're planning to go to university?
I think it's always important to stay on top of things, plan, make sure that you have a schedule and a routine, and that you're able to get yourself out of bed to do that schedule and that routine. One of the things that's quite common with autism is a diagnosis of ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and that can mean that concentrating for long periods of time and doing the studying that's required can be quite difficult. I think it's always important to know the services that are available to you. Universities tend to have disability access branches in the parts and stuff. So the knowledge of being autistic and whether you have any other sort of learning needs, such as dyslexia and dyscalculia, it's always important to let them know so that you can get adequate support for it. But it's also important to know where the quiet places are and where the places that don't have glaring fluorescent lights are. It's very difficult to find places like that, but there are places in every university that are easier to deal with, and so being able to find those places or ask people where those places are can be a good way to keep on top of your mental health, but also find an adequate studying environment.
Now, Tom, the reason why I came across you is through Anna Kennedy. She sends me an article and I publish it on my website. It's called Granger. And I published an article about your documentary, and I just learned that you created that documentary while you were at uni. So yeah. And I didn't manage to see all of the things that you've done, but from my understanding is that you're really passionate about raising awareness about Asperger. And I'm just wondering, do you think that there's still a stigma attached to Asperger or any other form of autism or any other mental health issue? Because right now, there's so many resources and there's so many platforms talking about autism or mental health issues. Do you think there's still stigma attached to it? That's why you're trying to campaign for autism?
I think unless there is some mainstream education about autism at a young age and mainstream awareness, it's difficult for people to understand what to do. If an autistic person is having a difficulty fitting in a work environment, which happens a lot, or difficulty in school, things around bullying and isolation and difficulty getting on with people, then it's hard for the autistic person to branch out and flourish as much as possible. Having a general awareness of autism is, it's key. It's at the heart of it. One of my main goals primarily is to address the mental health side of things. And if, you know, I've been working quite closely with the National Autism Research Society, Autistica, on publishing some statistics around mental health and bullying and social isolation and alienation. And there are some absolutely horrific stats around depression, around anxiety, you know, considering that the side of the spectrum that can be considered more high functioning, most people have above or average intelligence. Yet a massive proportion of university graduates aren't in work, they're not in full-time employment. So that's just one avenue of difficulty. The other is the outstanding mental health problems. And from my time on YouTube and my time podcasting and my time on social media and working in schools, it seems that this isolation and this bullying and this tendency for autistic people to have a very negative experience and traumatic experience plays a lot into them having a low quality of life. And it's even gone so far that the, you know, statistics around suicide and self-harm is just abnormally and ridiculously high in comparison to the norm. And it's something that I feel extremely passionate on getting into the mainstream media. You know, nobody's talking about it, and it breaks my heart hearing from people who are suffering. So that's the main key thing that I'm trying to work on. The awareness and workplace awareness is second to that, but definitely important to make sure that there's integration at an early age. People know about it at an early age and can better accommodate autistic people so that they don't have such a negative experience at school, which tends to be the root cause of these difficulties.
And of course, you're trying to spread this awareness on many other platforms, such as your YouTube channel. If you could just, what's the name of your YouTube channel? And if you could just talk to us the kind of contents that you upload. Yeah,
so my YouTube channel is called Asperger's Growth. So like Asperger's syndrome, chop off the syndrome bit, put growth on the end. It's a channel that I basically talk about autism to non-autistic people, or to a more mainstream or public, general public audience, in order for them to understand the autistic experience better. I do a lot of work on trying to, quite funnily, I do a lot of work on trying to understand non-autistic people. So my awareness of the differences and subtle changes and difference in behavior and processing is quite high. So it's easy for me to explain to people what it's like. On the other hand of things, I do a lot of work on using the notes that I made during my days of self-improvement to give my knowledge and more personal experiences to autistic people so that they can grow themselves, work on their confidence, deal with the mental health that quite often comes with autism, and generally feel better in themselves. And I put a lot of videos out on a range of different things. I've uploaded my documentary on my YouTube channel, which also has a website. And I do a lot of sort of behind the scenes videos to sort of give a more longer form interview with the people that are on the documentary.
So for those sort of, you know, in the autistic spectrum would like to follow your footsteps and launch their own YouTube channel, do you have any tips?
YouTube's hard. Like,
I can relate to that.
You've got to like making videos, and making videos has to be enough for a long time. At least 2 or 3 years, unless you happen to have, you know, some crazy luck
Yeah.
in order to get seen. I think it's important to do research. You can learn pretty much everything that you need to know from YouTube. Like, there's lots of videos on how to make things and how to film. You don't need expensive equipment. A lot of the modern day phones have cameras and microphones that are suitable enough for you to get started, maybe just a little bit of lighting gear. But a lot of it is practice. A lot of the speaking and the camera presence is something that you learn. And for me, it's taken a long time for me to get to a point where I'm competent on camera. But it does come, and it's something that needs to be constantly worked on if it's something that you want to do.
And I think it's also important, you try to be consistent and really try to be genuine what you're trying to achieve. You know, like,
I'm not consistent.
It's really key to be, successful in YouTube. If you want to gain more subscribers, you have to be consistent. But of course, it's not just all about the subs and the likes and the comments. It's nice to get that, but I think at the end of the day, you just have to remind yourself what is you're trying to achieve. Like you, for instance, you're trying to spread awareness, so it really doesn't matter whether you've got loads of followings, but if you could reach to a small number of people, but you're able to effectively convey what you're trying to tell them about autism, then you've done your part. But you've done a lot of things with autism and also with your personal life. So and you're still very young. In 10 years from now, what do you want to see yourself?
I want to be a spokesperson for autistic people. I want to be the person who raises issues in the mainstream, who is a positive role model to autistic children. We don't have a lot of role models for autistic children, and that's a difficulty, because they don't have anyone to aspire to or relate to. So that's one aspect of where I want to be. I want to be making films. I want to be doing documentaries. I want to be on TV and on radio stations for a living. Right now I'm doing it for free, and I'm going about and going on stations and chatting and doing podcasts and stuff. But it's definitely something that I want to do for a living, and I'm currently waiting on the results from a journalism apprenticeship that I've applied to. So fingers crossed with that. I think there's also something that I wanted to mention. The National Diversity Awards has recently sort of closed their nominations, and I've been nominated for that. So I'm still waiting to hear back from that. That could be something that pushes me into the mainstream, and I'm hoping that just being able to have a dialogue and change the stigmas around autism and help people who are autistic could make a difference, and that's basically what my goal is.
You're very motivated, Tom. So is there a particular individual which has the greatest influence to your work?
I found it very hard throughout my life to find a role model. I my granddad was a big role model and influencer for me. He sadly passed away of lung cancer a couple of years ago. But he was always in my corner, and he was always excited to hear the news from my Taekwondo career and stuff. And he's an amazingly strong man, but he's an amazingly kind man, and he's honest. And that's, what I shoot for. Other person, I think, in the more public would be Jordan Peterson. I find it very hard to relate to people, but this man has been a pivotal role in my own self-development and mental health, dealing with my mental health. So I'd definitely say that Jordan and my granddad would be two big role models for me.
We shared something in common. I'm actually a big fan of Jordan Peterson. I'm trying to have him on my YouTube channel, but he hasn't got back to me. So, Dr. Peterson, if you're watching this, I want to interview you. Anyway, Tom, can you tell us some of the misconceptions that you've heard about autism? You already alluded to this earlier, but if you could just highlight to us some of the misconceptions. I myself, I'm not really familiar about autism, although I've been working in the field of mental health.
I think it's very difficult to pin down certain things. I think one of the it's hard to pin down a certain misconception, but I think one of the difficulties is that some people can be quite patronizing to autistic people. People can be kind and want to be accommodating, but in general, as I've said, most people with high functioning autism or Asperger's tend to have quite a high IQ, and they're not necessarily fully socially incompetent. But still, there's situations where people, because there is a mainstream and a normal way of behaving and thinking about things and doing things. Anything that conflicts with that is seen as a symptom of autism, whereas actually it's just a symptom of someone thinking for themselves and having their own opinions. I guess one of the misconceptions is that we're not competent and independent, and I just don't agree with that. And I've spent my entire life trying to do things that I'm not supposed to be doing, like fighting. Like the idea of seeing an autistic person fight it, taking part in a full contact sport, when you've seen like films like Rain Man, and just doesn't compute for most people.
You mentioned something about Rain Man. Actually, that's the only film about autism that I've seen. So
good film. Good film.
It is a good film, but it's kind of I would say it's quite old, so perhaps it needs to be updated. Do you think like we should have more proper representations when it comes to autism? You've mentioned something about the role of mainstream. I can't remember any other film other than Rain Man. Do you think that the film, the television and the radio do have a role in trying to help you achieve your goal about spreading awareness about autism?
I think it does a good job of displacing some of the stereotypes that come from it. I myself, I'm terrible at maths. Can't do it. Rain Man, he can compute anything. Sorry, what did you say?
No, I was just wondering if you think there is enough
media. Oh yeah. I think there is a lot of representation coming through. From what I've seen, I find it difficult to watch shows that are primarily about autism because the whole storyline is based around autistic traits. A lot of the humor and stuff is based around autism, and they just don't get it wrong at all. They don't get it right at all. Some of the best films that I've seen that have a good representation of autism are things like The Bridge, which is a detective series. It was very popular when it came out, and it's a very good thing to watch. The main character in that has Asperger's. Same about something that I watched recently called Hannibal. It's a story that was made up around Hannibal Lecter. The main character is autistic, and he goes against the mainstream idea that autistic people can't be empathic, which is good. I think there's a lot of ways that we can do that, but until we get autistic people part of it instead of this either amazing autistic person, this glorified autistic person or this autistic person for sympathy, you know, like we see in Britain's Got Talent and stuff, then we're not really going to see a shift in the mainstream idea of autism. It needs to be from its core, you know, something that is a part of things, but not necessarily the focus.
That's why I really like what Anna Kennedy is trying to do. She invited me to go to Autism's Got Talent. I think I was there 2 years ago, and I was there with my husband and a friend, and three of us were watching Autism Got Talent, and we're also big fan of BGT, and the quality of the performance is really, you know, it's the same with Britain's, and I'm not trying to be to sound patronizing, with BGT and Autism Got Talent. And I think, like what you're saying, yeah, if we could see more of actually, you know, the diverse talents of people with autism, such as yourself, and perhaps it could shape, you know, the mainstream opinion of what actually autism is, that it's really a spectrum. Now, let's try to move on to a different topic. So what's your distressing outlet? How do you relax?
I find it very hard to relax because of my anxiety and my panic difficulties. It's more or less my brain makes me anxious at random parts of the day, and particularly at night time, and therefore it's quite hard for me to relax. One of the ways that I can generally help with my anxiety, that always helps, is exercise. Nothing is as important as exercise for relaxing. I think it's very overrated as a way of coping. It's not a cure-all for anxiety and chilling out, but it does help. I think my way of relaxing is different. I like to be engaged in something, but I usually play some sort of like mindless, you know, when I'm winding down for the evening, I'll play some mindless games on my phone and listen to an audiobook. That's what I like to do. Go out for a stroll in nature. All of the bog standard stuff, but it's a combination of lots of little different things. Yeah.
And it certainly helps, whether, you know, in relation to your mental health or you're just trying to relax. Now, Tom, I understand you're also in the process of writing a book. Would you tell us about what was the topic of your book?
Yeah, so I've been writing ever since I can remember. Like, it's always been something that I'm passionate about. I am currently sort of at a point where I'm trying to deliberate what the next part of the story is. So I'm still thinking, but the topic is basically around this character called Rayland, who is very, very similar to myself in some ways, and not similar in other ways.
So it's a novel. It's
a novel, yeah, fiction about this character and how he sort of goes through life and grows. It's difficult for me to provide a summary because it's not fully complete, but you know that there are extracts that I've put out on the Instagram account I have for it. It's called Blackbird. It used to be called Heartland until I realised that so many things are called Heartland, so I can't do that. But it's very much a work in process, and it's something that I do to relax, and it's something that I do for enjoyment. Who knows when it will be out, but it's still a work in process.
Yeah, we're looking forward to hearing more about your work, about your book. But definitely, when you have your book in your hand, it will be really quite exciting experience. Yeah, I remember the first time I published my book. Yeah, I can't believe, because it's a product of 5 years of hard work. It took me 5 years. Yeah, to finish that. Yeah, because I also have a full-time job aside from doing YouTube. So finally, Tom, what's in the pipeline, and could you also remind us of the social media platforms where we could come across your work and also your YouTube channel?
So there's a lot in the pipeline now. I think since my documentary's release, I've got in contact with a lot of charities and organisations. Typically Anna Kennedy Online, which I'm an ambassador to, and Fidget Bum, which is a company that produces like sleep aids for autistic people. And there's obviously lots of things that could be happening, sort of around media projects and around public speaking and going into workplaces and giving talks and stuff, which is all very exciting. But as of now, I am mostly getting in contact with people and putting out podcast episodes and finishing up the sort of the extra stuff around the documentary that I'm wanting to do. And then, of course, I'm waiting to hear about the National Diversity Awards. Very exciting. I hope that I get shortlisted. Fingers crossed. But if you want to check out my stuff, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. They're all Asperger's Growth. Very easy to find. 40 Auti Podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the YouTube channel is Asperger's Growth, so as I've said. And the documentary website is aspergersinsociety.com. So you can find me on any of those, and if you want to send me an email or get chatting to me, you can even get in contact with my social media or send me an email at aspergers@gmail.com.
I'll put all of those links on the video description box. But it's been an insightful conversation with you, Tom. I'm really grateful that you shared your time and your expertise telling to us about your work and also about autism and also about basically your trajectory in life. But unfortunately, our time is up. I look forward to hearing more about your work, and also good luck with the National Diversity Awards and your book. Thank you.
Thank you so much.